Welcome to Jason Live. My name is Patrick Shea. We're back once again with our STEM role model series where we connect you with role models in science, technology, engineering, and math to learn about their careers. Today's role model is Dan Norton. Dan co-founded a game production studio called Filament Games. He's the creative genius behind many of the digital labs that you'll find on the Jason website. If you've ever played Coaster Creator, Landform Detectives, Commander of the Nautilus, Energy City, Transform It, Masterminds, or Resilient Planet, for example, you're already familiar with Dan's work. We're going to learn from Dan just what it takes to be a game designer in just a moment. But before we do, I want to remind everybody out there that today's event is live and interactive. So just below this video window, you can see a box where you can enter questions, send us your questions, and participate in our live polls. Right now, it's time to get Dan involved in the program. Welcome, Dan. Thanks for
Hey
joining us
there, how's it
today.
going? It's going
Awesome.
great.
So everybody out there, I would think, is pretty familiar with what a video game is. So, you know, we're starting from a good place here in describing what it is you do and what you've followed as your career path. But why don't you tell us, in your words, what your role is there at Filament and what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. So I'm in charge of the design team at Filament Games, and so the designers are the people at our company who think of the core game ideas, document them, and then work with the teams to have them built. Uh, Filament Games is actually a game studio that works only on learning games. So we focus on making games that teach you something useful by the time you're done. And like Pat said, we worked on a lot of really cool games with Jason that we're very proud of. And we've also worked on science games in other areas too. So uh, on the day-to-day, the designers here do a lot of writing, a lot of communicating with the technical teams, and a lot of working with external clients like the Jason Project to see whether or not the games we're making are up to snuff and can be improved further.
Very cool. So I mentioned we're taking questions live. We've also had kids sending questions before the event started. So we have a lot to get through, and we're going to start getting to those right away. Our first one is from Erica, and she wants to know, what are some examples of video games that you have designed?
Oh, sure. So, like Pat said, I've worked on a lot of the Jason games. So, Coaster Creator was a really fun game that we made. Transform It, Landform Detectives. Uh, let's see. My personal favorite, actually maybe of all time, is Eco Defenders, which is a game we made with Jason, where you take control of little creatures in an environment and see who eats what and how. And that's a really fun game. We've also made some games that have been bigger for us recently. One's called Reach for the Sun, where you design a flower as it grows through an entire season. And your goal in that game is to manage the resources of the plant to have as many flowers and fruits before winter comes. And that's a very pretty game that I'm very proud of. Another really cool game we've worked on is called The Fuzzy Chronicles, which is a game about Newton's laws of motion. In that you control a little spaceship and you have to navigate through space by firing your rocket boosters to save the little cute fuzzy creatures in the world. So it's a combination of adventure and puzzle solving and using the principles of motion to get through. So yeah, so I haven't worked on a lot of, I haven't worked on Call of Duty and I haven't worked on Madden. So, unfortunately, but the games that we make, I'm very proud of because I think they are not only fun, but they do teach you something when you play them. And when you're done, what you got good at is something that I hope that you can sort of, store in your brain and then use again somewhere else.
Now, Dan, remember when I was telling you right before we went live that I felt like I was forgetting something?
Oh, right.
I
Yes.
forgot to load in all of the video of the Jason games that you've done. So
Oh,
hopefully people will have either used them already or will go online after this and check them out. So things like
right.
Coaster Creator. Um,
I highly recommend you check them out. There's a lot of them, and they're really cool.
they are. We're going to take a couple of video questions here. There are two in a row, so hang on before you answer.
Sure.
And this is from Asim and Gabe. We're gonna try that again. This time with the added benefit of audio.
Yes, sound.
Yes. All right. Here's the scene.
What tools do you need to make video games? How do you make a video game?
So, what tools and how do you make a video game?
That's a great question. And it's actually a very complicated question. It depends a lot on the type of game you want to make. So, a lot of the games we make here at Filament are obviously digital video games that are played on the computer or over the web. So, we have a team of people, all with different technical and creative skills that all work together to make games. So, in this game, Planet Mechanic, for example, we have a 3D artist who uses a 3D tool like Unity or Maya or 3D Studio Max to actually create 3D models that go into the game. Another person who is a programmer will actually program the code that make the game work. To make those models pretty and to generate interfaces, we have interface artists and illustrators who also make assets that go into the game. And then, of course, there's the designer who works on what the game is going to be in the first place, and then works with the team during development to make sure it's still cool. There's still more people though too. There's also sound designers, right, who make music and sound effects. There's the quality assurance people who test the game to make sure it's not broken. And there's also a web team who help deploy the game over the internet so that it can be played and possibly generate ways so that teachers can see what students are doing inside the game. So there's a lot of different roles. Making a game involves a lot of people working together to make something great.
Sounds pretty complicated, and at the same time, a lot of different types of job opportunities for kids out there that might be thinking about this as a career path. So not just game designer. We're going to move on to the next question. Both Kayla and B. Ryan wanted to know about how long does it take you to make a game?
Oh, sure. That's a great question. So some games can be done in a matter of a month or two, actually, if we know what it is, and it's a kind of a smaller game. Some really, really big games may take up to a year or longer. So it really does depend on the size of the game. To think about what a game is going to be, just as a designer, usually takes a process of something like 2 weeks if it's a really short and simple idea to document, or about a month and a half if you're working on something big, and then you've got a lot more thinking to do while it's being made after that too.
Here's a somewhat related question, again from Kayla. She wants to know, what's the hardest part of making a video game?
Oh boy. Well, so like I mentioned before, there's a lot of different folks who work on the game, and every single team member has different challenges, right? So a programmer may need to figure out a really hard, difficult thing to program or make a very complicated system inside the game. But, luckily, that's the type of thing they're good at and the kind of thing that they're passionate about being creative or solving. As a designer, the hardest part for me is making sure that the things that you do inside the game actually are relevant to learning the thing that we want you to teach, right? So we want you, when you get good at the game, to be good at the learning objectives, and that's very difficult and still keeping the game fun and interesting.
I bet.
So, yeah.
We've got a question next from Maria. She wants to know, what did you have to do to get a job at Filament Games?
Oh, sure. Well, I actually am one of the founding partners of Filament Games, so since I made the company, I got to have a job in it pretty easily. But to get to that point, my career before Filament, I had been doing interactive design at an online learning research place, actually affiliated with the university. And there I learned about the learning games as an idea. And that was just so exciting for me and the other partners that we decided to start the company and do it. So I got the job here by sort of working in the design field, and then meeting the people who are doing the research, who are really excited about the promise of what learning games could do.
So, kind of related question. If one of the kids out there wanted to work at Filament Games, what would they have to do to get their foot in the door?
Sure. Well, I can probably answer that most easily about being a designer, right? So, because that's what I know the most about myself. To be a designer at Filament, The thing I would love to see first and foremost is a really good game design document, right? So if you can think of and describe very clearly how a great game might work, then that's always a great way in to work here. Designers also have to have really, really strong communication skills. You need to be able to think and listen and talk a lot because you're constantly communicating from one team member to another what's most important and what needs to be done. So those are the kinds of things that we look for in new designers at Filament. If you wanted to work on, becoming a Filament designer or a designer at any video game company, I would recommend starting to try and design your own games. And they don't have to be digital games, right? Good game design happens in card games and board games, and you can do that with, cut out pieces of paper and just a lot of writing, thinking, and playing the game with your friends to make it better. So I would recommend that too.
And you can make games based on pretty much any topic, which gets us into our next question here from Reese, who wants to know, have you ever made a game based on bacon, or do you plan on doing this in the future? This was, I think, my favorite question
Yes.
that came
And
in before the
I'm
event.
very happy to say that we have made a game about bacon. It was called The Bacon Game. And in that game, you collect bacon as it falls from the sky. It was a just for fun game that we made inside Filament, really just because we could, right? We weren't hired to do it or anything, but we thought it'd be a really fun thing. So uh, if I can get your contact information, I can probably send you a private copy of The Bacon Game.
And here we have a little screenshot of the bacon
That's it.
game in action. So,
Yep.
somebody over there at Filament wrote a game design document and did
Mhm.
exactly that process that we were talking about for a bacon catching game.
Yep. See, that's our hero Trevor there. He's about to catch some bacon right there at that moment.
Um, we've got a follow up question here, if I can grab it.
Sure.
There it is. It's from Matthew. How do you come up with your game ideas, whether it's kind of the standard learning games that you do there at Filament or the more creative ones like the bacon game?
Sure, it's a great question, and obviously it's difficult to easily describe. I mean, a lot of it comes from what are the learning objectives for the game, right? So we can say, oh, what is it that we want you to know, and we could sort of poke at those ideas. So if we wanted to make, well, I'll go back to sort of like Reach for the Sun, right? If we want to make a game about how plants use resources and what are the parts of a plant, then we're like, okay, well, how could you play with a plant and learn those things, right? So uh, the idea that you would sort of design and build the plant yourself and then collect resources strategically kind of started to make more and more sense the more we thought about it and talked about it. So uh, it certainly helps, and I think people will think this is good news. It certainly helps if you've played way too many games, which I have. I've played video games for my entire life, and I have just this big weird catalog in my head of different kinds of games that I've played. So when I'm thinking about how to make a new game, I can sort of flip through my mind and think if there's anything similar to that I might have experienced before,
Mhm.
and I can combine ideas or change ideas to come up with a new idea by looking at things that have been made before me.
Well, glad you mentioned that because Nicole was actually wondering pretty much the same thing. She wants to know what video games inspire you. Any specific examples you can share?
Well, I guess I'll answer that in two ways quickly. I guess so. In the world of educational games, I think Carmen San Diego, Where in the World is Carmen San Diego, was one of the coolest ideas for a game ever. I think it's so cool because it's a game that teaches you how to use a reference, right? You're chasing Carmen San Diego across the world, and by doing that, you learn how to use an almanac, right? And for people just learning how to use references, that's a really big deal. And when I was a kid and I played Carmen San Diego, I had no idea I was playing a learning game. I just thought I was playing a cool detective game. And I got really good at using an almanac, and that's the kind of skill you use for the rest of your life. So So for learning games, that's kind of like my hero game. For commercial games, the list is pretty big.
Well, we
I,
give one example here.
yeah, I've played a lot of Skyrim lately, and I think that's going to be on my new top 5 of all time games. It's a huge, beautiful game, and I've never played a game where just walking through the woods feels like an adventure. So that's I'll say that's a game that's currently very inspiring to me.
So I want to time for one more question in this segment, but I want to kind of have you distinguish for us between. We've talked about design in a couple different ways. So you've talked
Mhm.
about game design. We're also talking a bit about art design. And our next question from a group of students in Mrs. Bound's class. They're asking, how do you create the video art, such as the creatures' faces? So, can you respond to that, but also talk a bit about the different types of design efforts that go into video game creation?
Absolutely. So that creature art for many of our games, we have a group of illustrators who are drawing, usually on the computer, but often with pen and paper as well, who actually create that art, right? So those things right there, those fuzzies and the spaceship, those were all drawn by artists and then imported into the game. So uh, that's one of the things I'm most proud of about Filament, really, is that we get to pay artists every day to make art, and that's sort of a big privilege for me. I'm very proud that we're able to do that. Um, but yes, in order to get all the pieces of a game there's all kinds of different people who are applying different types of skills and talents. Some are very talented programmers. Some people are very talented planners, right? And they work on the production planning of the game to make sure it's on time. The artists are obviously very talented illustrators, and then the designers are very talented creative thinkers and writers. So uh, all sorts of people have to contribute their different talents together to make a game happen.
Well, we've talked a lot now about the kind of work you do today. We're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about the past. How
Sure.
did you get to the point that you're at? How did you get into this job? We've got a question from Reggie who's going to kick us off down that line. He wants to know, could you speak to what led up to your choice to become a game designer? Were you a gamer? Were you a techie? How did you pursue your choice, and what path would you recommend for middle and high school students that want to become game designers in the future?
That's a really cool question. The Really, the path for me being a designer is that I've always loved solving problems. Solving weird problems is my favorite thing, right? So I've always enjoyed having new challenges that I don't know the solution for and trying to see if I can figure them out, right? So, and uh, as I started my career altogether, I knew I liked solving problems and I knew I liked design, right? Because design, uh, uh, just as a word and as a field, right? Even if it's graphic design or web design, or even like industrial design, what design almost always means, it's that it's applied creativity with constraints. Like there's rules that you have to follow and an objective you have to meet. But in order to get to that solution, you have to get there creatively. And that's always been my favorite kind of problem. So I started my career doing graphic design and web design, right? So I would do illustrations and I would work on interfaces and then I would design websites. And when I started designing websites, that got me thinking more about interaction. And all through my life, I've been playing video games all this time. And at that point in I had no idea that the games would ever sort of intersect with my career. I just loved playing them. I loved thinking about them. But then all my work was in interactive design. Uh, and then I had this crazy sort of collision where I met all these people who were researching and trying to learn about how to make good games for learning. And that just like lit up all the lights for me, right? Because that's a really, really weird problem to solve. And and it has a very clear goal. And it speaks to what I love to do. I love to learn. I love to find out about new things and solve problems in new ways. So I get to help other people creatively learn about the world in creative weird ways. So that's kind of how it sort of all landed for me, and it became what I did.
Sounds like a perfect match. We've got an interesting question here from Carl, who wants to know what kinds of languages, what kinds of programming languages have you learned?
Oh, sure. So I guess it's worth saying, so as a designer at Filament, I write very little code that goes into the games themselves. There actually are on-staff programmers who do the bulk of the programming. Having said that, just for my own interests and background, I've learned smatterings of different languages to do different things. So I've done ActionScript in Flash, JavaScript for using some other prototyping tools. I used to do a little bit of Python just because it's a really fun, weird programming language. I never did any C++ or any sort of the big, heavy languages, but a lot of different scripting languages and light object-oriented languages. Sorry, that got a little nerdy.
That's okay. That was the question. And do you feel
Okay.
like even if you're not using that code every day, or your code isn't getting into the game, your understanding of how it works is helping you think about the game design or communicate with your programmers?
Absolutely. It's actually, I think, very critical that I need to be able to talk to very, very technical people and understand the types of problems they have. And so if I didn't understand just the principles of programming and how programming and computers work, I would have a lot of disconnects when I tried to ask for things in games that wouldn't be possible or very difficult. So, and it also enables the programmers to talk to me about their problems, and we can work together to come up with a new creative solution. So it's really an important skill.
Great. We've got a video question next from Jade.
Who is Miss Newville and why is she your favorite teacher?
Miss Newville. Oh, I'm so glad that you read that. Thank you, by the way.
Yeah, they've
Miss
clearly
Newville,
been reading your Q&A form on the website, and they got that information.
Miss Newville was my third grade teacher, and she was my favorite teacher because I could make her laugh. Uh, and that was my daily challenge was, can I make Miss Newville laugh? She was funny. She was really smart. And she was just, it was fun to have a daily goal to try and keep her entertained. And sometimes it worked. Sometimes I was maybe sent to the principal, but yeah, she was great. I think is maybe the first person I met in school who was clearly having a really good time, and that I think that stuck with me.
That's great. We actually have another question from Jade, who has read your Q&A in great detail, clearly. So let's see what else she has to ask.
Mm-hmm.
I read in your interview that you didn't graduate from college, but how are you smart enough to make video games if you didn't?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's very fair. So I went to college for about 4 or 5 years, but I didn't wind up getting a degree on the other side. I studied a bunch of different things. Like I said earlier, I like to know about a little bit about a lot of things. So I didn't have that much focus, and I ultimately left school to go take a design job to start doing interactive design. So I learned a lot about how to do my job while on the job, right? And I certainly learned a lot of things in college. So I wouldn't urge people to skip college. There's a lot of value out of it, and you meet a lot of great people, and you pick up a lot of great skills. Someday maybe I'll go back. I don't know when, but it's on the list.
Got it. We're going to take a break from asking you questions for a moment, Dan, and we are going to ask our audience some of the poll questions that you came up with.
Oh, great.
And I want to be clear, Dan came up with these, and you'll see why I want to be clear about that in a sec. It's definitely Dan's sense of humor. Here's the first one. Dan wants to know, he's made games about one or more of the following. Has he made games about A, ocean science, B, choosing the right pants to wear on a date? Has he made games about C, waffles? Or has he made games about D, all of the above? Dan, this is quite a mix of game possible topics here. I have to admit to our audience, I do not know the answer. So I am going to be just as surprised as they are to find out whatever it is. Folks are voting right now. I can see the responses coming in. So far, 67% think it's all of the above. So, maybe they were listening to us talk about the bacon game and just figure anything is fair game as a game. 29% at the moment think ocean science, which seems like the safe answer. It seems like those answers are holding up. Ocean science getting a few more votes here, but I think, Dan, why don't you tell us what the answer is?
All right. Well, it looks like I got you guys on a zinger. It's actually I have not made a game about waffles yet. I did do bacon, but not yet waffles. And choosing the right pants to wear on a date is something I haven't figured out yet either. So I have made games about ocean science, though. So the answer is A.
A, ocean science. There we go. It does bring up an important point. If you're going to create a learning game about a topic, you actually have to understand that topic pretty thoroughly. So if you don't know how to pick out which pants to wear, you can't rightly be teaching others.
It's true. Yep. And so it's kind of fun. By the time we're done with the game here at Filament, sort of the whole team has gotten a crash course on how that type of thing works.
Yeah.
And it's actually one of the neatest things about the job.
Cool. We're going to move on to poll number 2. What do game designers do a lot of? Is it A, writing? Is it B, drinking different kinds of juice? Is it C, push-ups? Or is it D, all of the above? I have a feeling we're not going to stump folks out there on this one quite as much as the last. Because we did talk about this earlier in the program, so if they were paying attention, they might have heard you mention that one of these things is something that's very important for a game designer to do. We've got votes coming in right now. Writing has taken the early lead at about 65%. All of the above getting some votes. There are a few people out there that think drinking different kinds of juice is something that you might do a lot of. And it's important to note here, we're talking about game designers in general, not just one specific game designer who actually happens to drink a lot of juice or do a lot of push-ups. So looks like the votes are kind of settling in. Writing, 71% is the winner according to our audience. Dan, what's the correct answer?
That is the correct answer. Writing is the name of the game. Designers have to create all kinds of different documents. Some of them are stories. Some of them are dialogue for characters. Some of them are rules for the game. But you are constantly writing, because you need to get your ideas into a form that is communicatable to everybody and that stays put, right? So you have to write it and say, look, I wrote that. That's how it works.
Now, is this something that before you had really kind of launched into this game design career, did you expect that? Was that something you knew going in, or is that something you learned on the job?
I think what surprised me about the writing is just how many different forms the writing takes. Sometimes I have to create even spreadsheets, right, where I've got all sorts of different little bunches of numbers that are all working together with each other in a complicated way. And then sometimes I have to draw sort of stick figure storyboards that show how a game works step by step. And they're not pretty, but they show visually how the game works. So I'm constantly surprised by the different forms that I have to write and I have to create documentation. Mm-hmm. I've always liked writing, though. Writing is, has been something that I've always enjoyed. So it's been really cool to be able to explore different ways of communicating.
Well, that is actually a great segue into poll number 3. Hope I didn't give away the answer too much there, but this one asks, what educational accomplishment is Dan most proud of? Is it A, earning a perfect score on his 9th grade chemistry test? Is it B, graduating from high school? Is it C, writing an essay about having the flu that was too disgusting to read, according to his teacher? Let's see. We've got some votes coming in already. No, we don't. We need to push the poll, and then we'll have votes coming in. So let's see what folks think out there. Give them a sec to answer. So far, 100% think writing an essay about having the flu that was too disgusting to read. That is still in the lead. About 30% think graduating from high school, so we're getting some votes there.
Hmm.
Nobody is guessing A at the moment. Nobody thinks you got a perfect score on your ninth grade chemistry test, apparently. Um, but yes, 70% for C, writing an essay about having the flu. That seems to be the winner for this one, according to our audience. Dan, what's the right answer?
That is actually the correct answer. I was given an assignment to write something that would uh, create an emotional reaction, right? So I wrote about having the flu, and I think I used the term, what was it? A cascade of salty lung snot.
Wow.
Was it? Yeah. Yeah. And the teacher gave me an F and said, "This is too disgusting to read."
Oh,
Uh,
that
but
doesn't seem fair. That
I thought, yeah, I kind of thought I won, right? I thought I was like, well, you wanted an emotional reaction. I think I got it. So
Well, you got an F, but it was still your proudest moment. So
it was worth it to me.
it sounds like pure poetry to me. We're going to move on and get back to our questions. This one is from Janie. Let's pull it down so we can see it. What courses do you recommend for high school students to enroll in, such as computer classes, if they want to follow in your footsteps?
That's a great question. I would say yes, if you have a class that allows you to learn about computer programming, I would definitely take that. Um, I think what might be a surprise is I would definitely recommend trying to get into any creative writing courses. I would also encourage you to think about doing things like if you have any after school clubs that are, well, obviously, if there's a game design after school club, that'd be great, but game playing clubs, or even sort of collaborative creative clubs like an improv group or theater, right? Anywhere where you're asked to think about things, think about new perspectives, and solve interesting problems are all great places to pick up skills about how to work with people and solve problems.
Very interesting. Our next question is from Zach. He says, I'm interested in learning to program video games. Do you think it's better to go to classes to learn how, or should he try to teach himself?
Mm. Oh, that's a tough one, Zach. I think everyone learns differently. Uh, and not only that, but what they're trying to learn, sometimes they can learn it better one way versus the other. So uh, I would try, I honestly would try both and see what sticks. Certainly in a class, you have got support and someone you can talk to. But when you're working on your own, especially if it's something you're passionate about, you can find that you can really get a lot from just exploring and poking at it yourself. So I think I would try both and see what works. Sorry, that's not a super great answer, but
It
uh,
works for me. And
okay,
sometimes learning on your own might be the only option. There might not be a class, or at least a class available. So, that's the only way to do it on occasion.
it's true.
Our next question is from Mike. He wants to know what programming language or languages should a middle school or high school student start learning to set them on a path to designing games?
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's a very good question. Um, there are different types of tools you can use to make games by yourself, and some of them have different amounts of programming. So there's an online game called GameStar Mechanic that lets you start thinking about game design with doing very little coding. There are also, if you're interested in the coding side, there's a really cool uh, programming language called Perlenspiel, which I'll spell very quickly. Perlenspiel. And what that is actually it's a little coding library that is in the language called JavaScript. And that lets you very easily create games that can be played on the web that take place on a grid. So checkers or a tic-tac-toe or any kind of board game that you think, or even a digital game that takes place on a set of squares can be made very easily with that language. And it's real programming too. So it's a really nice tool. I actually use it myself to do prototypes for games before we develop them at Filament. So before I even get working with a programmer, if it fits, I'll use Perlenspiel to sort of make a mock-up of how I think the game could work and try and solve some of the big problems. So that one's really nice, and it's really programming, right? It's the real deal. So I recommend that. Um, there's also uh, let's see, Game Maker is a program that has an integrated coding with it, and you can make very cool platforming games with that. And if you're up to it, there's also Adobe Flash, which is a game environment that allows you to make games that can be played on the web. And then it has a language with it called ActionScript. So there's a lot of options.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And if I can throw in my 2 cents here, you know, programming technology changes all the time, and the
it does.
platforms and stuff change all the time. So really, it's get into, I would say, any of those languages, like one of the ones that you just mentioned, and you're going to learn those concepts that will carry through even if you switch language down the road. The approaches and the way that you think about solving those problems are pretty similar across all of the different languages, I would think.
I totally agree. And just here at Filament, our programmers change languages very regularly from one project to another. So it's less about which specific language you know and more whether can you think like a programmer.
Yeah.
And then if so, then the rest is just sort of figuring out the fiddly details. So just getting started on any programming that you think is fun uh, will be the best possible way to go.
Makes sense. We've got time for just a couple of more questions before we have to wrap up here. This one's from Allie and Jenna. They want to know, how old were you when you started making video games?
Well, I made board games and card games when I was a little kid, probably, second and third grade. I don't think they were very good, but I've always thought about the idea of making games would be a neat thing. Making digital games didn't happen until let's see, yeah, about a decade or so ago. So a little bit before we started this company, and my previous job was my first opportunity making making digital video games with a team. So yeah.
That segues very nicely into Zeke's question. Would you recommend for or against being a solo game creator?
Sure, that's a great question. And I would actually recommend against. Um, I think that a lot of the best opportunities to be creative and to come up with great ideas is by collaborating with other people, because other people know lots of things you don't. And learning from them and working with them and getting their opinion back and forth is a really critical part, I think, about a great creative process. So it's certainly, there's nothing wrong with working on your own project for your own interests to get better at your skills. But if you want to make something great, I think you probably should work with other people to make it happen, especially in a digital video game, because there's so many different types of skills that go into a game that wouldn't it be awesome if you worked with people who are great at all of those skills rather than having you maybe being great at one, kind of good at another one, kind of lousy at another. Yeah, so yeah, I would recommend working with people.
Good advice. Next question is from Sean. Have you ever recreated yourself as an animated character?
Um, that's a great question, and maybe if you were to play some of the games I made with iCivics, like We of the Jury, uh, maybe you might see someone in there that looks a little bit like me.
I'm trying to see if I have in our files here. Might take me a sec to bring up, but why don't we answer another question while we're seeing if I can do that. This is
Hmm.
actually a question slash comment from a middle school teacher in Berkeley, California. She's there with her class, and they are thrilled to hear that you suggest improv as a creative outlet. They have an active improv after school club there in their school. Do you have a favorite improv game?
Oh, that's a great question. I do. There was a game I used to play where you had to set a scene and not be funny. It had to be as unfunny as possible. And so you and the other people would have to improvise a scene that was absolutely not funny. And what would often happen is that the scene would become really, 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 really funny because everyone's working super hard at the opposite. And I always thought that was great just because it was the outcome was unexpected. I would say sometimes though it did actually wind up being just not funny, but it was real. It was always a fun and interesting surprise, and I always really enjoyed that exercise.
All right. In the meantime, I mean, look at that. That is, it just seems to match almost exactly. So was this one of your animated characters of yourself, or is this something else?
Oh, the art team makes these pictures for all staff members. You can actually kind of see this picture was made before I had a beard, and the beard was kind of put in after the fact. Although it's also funny, I need to shave in this picture as well as in real life. So
I know,
that's
it's
that part's at least
uncanny. Talented artists. They've definitely nailed this one. All right. Well, I actually think that is all the time that we have. We've gone long with you today, Dan, but we really appreciate you taking all this time to share insights into your career and to inspire a new generation of game designers out there.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure, and yeah, thank you everyone for coming. And if you want to ask me any other questions, if you go to filamentgames.com, you can find a way to contact me on email, and I'm happy to answer anything else.
And thus begins the onslaught of email to Dan's Filament Games account. Thanks, Dan. I really appreciate you taking the time. We are back again next week with a host researcher from Jason's newest curriculum called Climate Seas of Change. Her name is Diane Stanitsky, and she's a NOAA climatologist. Diane uses a network of ocean buoys to track long-term patterns and changes that can impact climate all over the world. But when she was 15, she thought she wanted to be a radio DJ. Find out what got her on a STEM career path by joining us live next Thursday, February 20th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. That is all for today. Thanks for joining us once again for Jason Learning. My name is Patrick Shea. We'll see you next time on Jason Live.